Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a story that might make you look twice at that shiny little fork on your nightstand tray. Imagine a world where using a fork wasn't just strange, it was sinful. Like eternal damnation if you stab your beef strips with this thing. Kind of sinful. The stars are out, the night's calm, and you, tucked under your favorite blanket, are about to time travel to a place where manners meant using your fingers and innovation meant, well, eternal judgment. It's going to get weird in a good way, unless you're the kind of person who eats cake with a spoon. In that case, brace yourself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love knowing what corner of the sleepy world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a slow step into a dusty market square in the 7th century, where cries ring out in ancient Greek, and the air hits you with the mingling scent of sweat and crushed herbs. The heat feels like it's trying to sear your scalp, and the butcher? He's tearing chunks of pork apart with his bare hands. No knives, no forks, no spoons, just fingers. And a devout belief that hands were a gift from God and food was meant to be touched. But in a quieter corner of Constantinople, where faint chanting echoes from a tiny chapel, something unusual is happening. A Byzantine noble wrapped in layers of costly silk is using a tiny golden fork, two-pronged, to eat candied pears. The dainty little thing glimmers in the candlelight, and the surrounding servants exchange awkward glances. You lean in, just slightly, to get a better look. It resembles a surgical tool more than a dining utensil. Delicate, elegant, but a little unsettling, like watching someone eat sushi with toenail clippers. At first, forks weren't used for main courses. They were meant for picking up sticky candied fruits, small pastries, or honeyed preserves that would otherwise leave your fingers in a gooey mess. The Byzantine elite loved cleanliness, but this kind of cleanliness, it was seen as a mark of decadence. Some clergy at the time began whispering during closed-door meetings, "We've gone too far. If hands are no longer good enough, what else will they demand?" Others muttered, "Fingers are of God, but that thing, that's Persian, heretical." Sounds dramatic, but you have to understand, this was an age where even washing your hands before a meal wasn't exactly common practice. So someone calmly eating spiced apple slices with a fork? That was downright provocative, almost obscene. Fun fact, forks even showed up at noble weddings as a symbol of elevated manners. But that same elegance made them a target. Because when you act too refined in a world where roughness is the norm, you're unintentionally declaring war on the status quo. There are records of early forks having only 2 tines, something that, if you saw it in your kitchen today, you'd probably think was meant for roasting sausages over a BBQ. But in Constantinople, it was a symbol of power, separation, and borderline heresy. And then, like all beautiful things that get misunderstood, the fork became the victim of suspicion. People began to spread the idea that using one was a sign of arrogance against God's design. It sounds like a sleepy sermon, sure. But back then, that was enough to get you quietly exiled from decent society. Picture this. You invite a priest over for dinner, set the table, and gently place a fork next to the plate. It could be seen as an act of rebellion, or worse, heresy. Historians still debate whether the fork was truly hated for religious reasons, or if people just thought it looked weird and a little creepy. One scholar once wrote, "Perhaps it wasn't the fork they hated. Perhaps they just hated the feeling of being forced to relearn how to eat." You close your eyes for a moment. The night breeze brushes past, carrying the scent of dry grass and wood dust. In your mind, you're seated at a Byzantine banquet, candlelight dancing on silver bowls, while a man across from you lifts grapes with a tiny fork, as if performing a ritual. It feels like watching a mukbang video in slow motion, inside a cathedral. At the time, no one imagined that this tiny fork would spark such a huge controversy. But this was only the beginning. And you know how it goes. Nothing ever enters history without stirring up a bit of trouble. Now hold on to that image of the little fork, golden, light, and slightly unsettling, because in the next chapter you'll meet the person who brought it to Italy and accidentally ignited the fury of the entire church. You find yourself standing by the docks of Venice where the waves lap gently against weathered wood and the air is thick with the scent of fish, salt, and something else. Anticipation. A royal entourage is gathering to welcome a princess. From the east, elegant poised and bringing with her trunks full of silk, spices, and one tiny object that's about to scandalize an entire city. A golden, two-pronged fork. Her name is Theodora Dukaina, a noblewoman from the prestigious Byzantine line, sent to Venice as part of a political marriage, and you, tucked somewhere, in the curious crowd, can sense the stir she causes as she descends from the ship, spine straight, gaze cool, hands that never touch food directly. At a welcome banquet held in her honor, you're seated far down the long table, quietly observing, while the Italian nobles are joyfully tearing into chicken legs with their bare hands, wiping mouths with sleeves. The princess delicately removes a small fork from a velvet case, gently spears a slice of candied pear, and the room freezes. You can feel the stares, the frowns, the confusion rippling down the table. One cardinal drops a whole grilled fish from his hands, eyes wide like he just witnessed a minor act of sorcery. The Italians, famous across every century for their flair, aren't always quick to embrace change. They don't necessarily like new things, they like starting new things. So when something foreign appears at their table, the first reaction isn't awe. It's suspicion, and that tiny fork, that odd little thing, was seen as a symbol of Eastern arrogance. Too clean, too careful. One onlooker muttered, "If she fears getting her hands dirty that much, maybe she should wear gloves to live." You stifle a laugh. The whole moment feels like a silent stage play. Theodora, a regal leading lady, remains utterly unfazed, eating her fruit with surgical precision as if nothing around her exists. And somehow you sense she knows exactly what she's doing. The gossip spreads fast. Some whisper the princess is too proud to eat like virtuous women do. Others claim the fork has mystical properties, either to ward off demons or to attract them, depending on who's telling the story. Either way, the fork has officially become the star of Venice's social panic. Here's something few people know. In Byzantium, forks had a sacred purpose. They weren't meant for everyday meals. They were tools in religious rituals. But Theodora, by introducing the fork into casual dining, blurred the line between divine and domestic, and the church wasn't thrilled about it. Historians still debate whether Theodora meant to cause a stir. Some argue it was a political gesture, a quiet way for the East to assert dominance. Others think she was simply a woman with refined hygiene and excellent table manners. One thing certain, the church noticed. Not long after that fateful dinner, a sermon is delivered at the San Marco Basilica with a subtle but pointed message. When false elegance replaces the simplicity of God, the soul may stray. Everyone in the room knows exactly who that was about. As you stroll along the cobbled streets, back toward your lodging, the cool sea air rustles your cloak. You hear whispers from the shadows. She doesn't eat like us. And then you wonder, would you have used a fork back then? Probably not. Or maybe you'd hide one in your pocket, wait until no one was watching, then sneak a perfect little bite of soft, syrupy pear, just to feel different for a moment, just to not be part of the crowd. That night the princess lies in her chamber, candlelight flickering across stone walls. The fork rests carefully beside a bottle of amber perfume and a silver comb. You imagine her gazing at it, not as a weapon of war, but as a quiet agent of change. And that change, as you'll soon see, won't come easily. Because very soon, someone powerful will say, no. And not just say it, they'll ban it, all because of one tiny, shiny, defiant little fork. The bells of Rome toll deep and slow as you walk beneath the shadow of the Vatican. Morning mist coils around the marble pillars like incense smoke, and the sound of distant prayers echoes through cold stone corridors. Something in the air feels heavy, as if even the pigeons circling St. Peter's Basilica are quieter than usual. Word has reached the Pope. It's not just gossip now. The fork, the strange pronged tool from the East, has become a matter of divine concern. You sit on a cold bench in a side chapel, pretending to be just another tired pilgrim. In truth, you're eavesdropping. A pair of monks shuffle past, whispering urgently. They say she used it again, one mutters. At the feast of St. Apollonia. And in public, the other replies, clutching his robe, with candied figs. If this were any other city, maybe people would laugh it off. But here, in the heart of Christendom, where popes debate not just earthly laws, but the rules of salvation itself, even the smallest objects can become symbols. And this particular object? It's about to be declared unholy. Pope Benedict VIII, strong-willed, proud, and absolutely not a fan of culinary innovations, is already disturbed by what he views as rising decadence. He's seen how luxury seeps into piety like wine into altar cloth. And now he's heard about the fork. According to the whispers that curl through cloisters and echo behind confessionals, the Pope considers the fork not only unnecessary, but an affront to divine intention. After all, did not God himself give man fingers with which to eat? Why replace his design with metal? Soon a decree is issued, not in a fiery speech, but in a quiet letter, circulated among bishops and abbots. It's not yet public, but it's clear the use of forks is discouraged. They are, according to the papal words, an excess born of vanity and ungodly pride. You sit at a tavern that night, watching the locals slurp stew with greasy fingers. Somewhere near the hearth, a drunk theologian is explaining loudly that the fork resembles a miniature pitchfork, the devil's tool, he slurs, jabbing. A spoon into the air, and strangely enough, people nod. One older woman beside you mutters, "A woman who fears food touching her hands surely fears her own humanity." She bites into a roasted onion with alarming determination. The message is clear. If you're using a fork, you're no longer one of them. You're part of something foreign, decadent, and possibly, just maybe, sinful. Here's a strange historical fact. The church at the time believed that too much focus on physical cleanliness could signal spiritual rot. If you cared too much about staying tidy, perhaps you weren't focused enough on the purity of your soul. And Theodora, with her dainty fork and perfume and clean fingertips, suddenly looked like a threat to moral order. Historians still argue over whether the Pope truly banned the fork outright or merely disapproved of it loudly enough for others to do the banning for him. Some claim there was no official edict. Others swear copies of the letter existed and were burned when fashions shifted. Like many things from the Middle Ages, the line between reality and myth is as slippery as a boiled eel. What we do know is this: for the next few centuries, forks became symbols of heresy, arrogance, or at best, bizarre affectation. They lingered on the fringes of society, like misunderstood inventions before their time, like fax machines in 1982 or the Segway. You slip out of the tavern and into the night, feeling the cool Roman air wrap around you. In a tiny alley, you spot a nobleman dropping something shiny into a gutter, too ashamed to be seen holding it. A fork, maybe, or a memory of one. Even nobles who once flirted with the trend now pretend they never touched it. At court, platters are passed, fingers used, lips licked. The church smiles. God's design is honored once more. But in one quiet window of the city, high above the alleys and incense smoke, Theodora holds her fork anyway. She dines alone now. No banquets, no guests, just a candle, a plate of simple fruit, and her little two-pronged protest. You imagine her hand pausing just before each bite, not out of hesitation, but out of defiance. A silent question aimed at the heavens. Must I surrender even this? And as you drift off that night in a borrowed bed under a straw roof, the question follows you like a shadow. What else have we banned for being too elegant, too different, too ahead of its time? The fork sleeps, for now, but not forever. The years roll forward like fog spilling through a valley, quiet but constant. You find yourself further north now, deep in the heart of medieval France, where the food is heavier, the winters colder, and the suspicion of forks still lingering. You're seated at a long table inside a stone manor, fire crackling at one end, smoke curling into beams overhead. A feast is underway: roasted pheasant, turnips soaked in butter, and a slab of something that vaguely resembles pie, but definitely fights back when you try to chew it. Everyone eats with fingers, knives, or occasionally spoons carved from horn. The mood is lively, wine flows like a broken pipe, and your hands are sticky with honeyed prunes. Suddenly, across the room, a young nobleman, clearly just back from Italy and clearly trying to impress someone, pulls a small object from a pouch. At his belt, two slender prongs, gold, shiny. You don't even need to squint. It's a fork. Silence ripples outward from his seat like he just brought a snake to dinner. Someone coughs. A serving girl drops a tray. One of the older knights slowly sets down his tankard and leans in with the precision of a man who's about to offer a very stern lesson. You think you're better than us? The knight growls, meat juice glistening on his chin. Too good to tear bread with your hands like a Christian? The nobleman fumbles a reply, something about refinement, about hygiene. But it's too late. The moment's been branded. Fork equals arrogance. Again, you quietly resume eating your turnips, pretending you didn't see anything. The truth is, in this time and place, a fork doesn't say classy, it says foreign. It whispers things people don't like: change, vanity, and above all, nonconformity. The same way wearing sunglasses indoors today makes people think you're either a rock star or deeply insecure. What's fascinating is that forks do exist in Europe during this period. They're just rare, and almost exclusively used for cooking, or carving meat. To bring one to a table and use it as a personal tool, that's like bringing your own microphone to a dinner party and narrating your meal. But the rumors haven't died. Across the channel in England, a bishop is said to have cursed a man for using a fork, claiming it was an instrument of the devil's vanity. In Germany, a monk writes a letter describing how such objects pierce the humility of man. That line sticks with you. It's poetic, dramatic, and completely absurd. And yet, it works. Even now, centuries after Theodora, forks are still caught in cultural limbo. Not banned, not accepted, just avoided, like that one oddly quiet cousin at every family reunion. There's one record, rare and barely whispered, of a French queen who supposedly owned a jeweled fork and used it only when alone behind curtains. Her servants weren't allowed to speak of it. Some believed she did it to feel closer to her mother's Byzantine heritage. Others said it was a reminder of home. Either way, it was an open secret, like whispering the name of a lost love when no one's around to hear it. Historians still debate whether this queen ever really used a fork or if the story was invented later to make her seem eccentric. Maybe it doesn't matter. The fact that such a tale existed tells you everything. Even in secrecy, the fork survived. One night, while staying in the corner room of a drafty inn, you spot a traveling merchant warming his hands by the fire. His pack rests beside him, clinking with metal. He sees your interest and, with a grin, opens a pouch to reveal a small bundle of forks. Italian, polished, beautiful. He winks and says, French nobles want them, but only if no one sees. You buy one. You don't say why. That night, in the silence of your room, you unwrap it. You hold it in your hand like an artifact, which it is, not just a tool, but a symbol of defiance, sophistication, and stubborn survival. You eat an apple with it. It feels ridiculous and perfect. The candle flickers low. You listen to the wind rattle the shutters. Somewhere out there, the world still prefers sticky fingers and loud slurps. But not you. Not tonight. You wake to the scent of roasted chestnuts and the soft clang of church bells outside a tall window. The merchant road has brought you east again, this time to Prague, where Gothic spires cut into the morning mist like ancient fingers grasping at heaven. It's the 14th century now, and while the world is still ruled by fingers and knives, there are whispers, again, of something with prongs. You walk the market square, boots tapping against uneven stone. Bakers shout prices, blacksmiths hammer away, and on a quiet corner, a nobleman's steward is arguing loudly with a cook about how to properly serve a roasted swan. With dignity, the steward insists, not torn apart like a battlefield ration. That's your cue. You inch closer, feigning interest in a basket of pears. The steward produces it. Another one, not gold this time, silver, simple, utilitarian, and elegant. A fork. The cook recoils slightly, as though he's been asked to plate. The swan with a cursed artifact. You hear him mutter something about the church, about bad luck, about how he once knew a baker who got sick the day after touching one. There it is again. The superstition. It clings to the fork like dust on a chapel window. You follow the steward back to a modest estate and discover the truth. Forks are making a slow, quiet comeback among the European elite, but only behind closed doors. Private dinners, hidden utensils. It's like the early days of jazz or disco. People pretend they hate it in public, then go home and indulge in secret. And why? Because it works. Because the fork is, frankly, better. No mess, no meat juice on your sleeve, no awkward reaching. For greasy bread with the same fingers you just used to pet a dog. It's convenient, controlled, and oddly empowering, like driving a car with power steering after years on a squeaky bicycle. But progress is never smooth, especially not here. One evening, while attending a small feast in a drafty stone hall, you see a young lady, barely 15, use a fork with quiet grace. Her father watches with pride. Her aunt gasps audibly. A priest at the far end of the table frowns so deeply you fear he might turn into stone. After dinner, he pulls the girl aside. Not in anger, in warning. You must not let the devil slip in through something so small, he says gently. The path to vanity is paved with delicate habits. You step outside into the frost-bitten night, stars prickling the black sky. You think about that phrase, delicate habits. Isn't that just another word for manners, for thoughtfulness? Historians still debate whether this was the true turning point in the fork's story, this slow, private spread among aristocrats. Some say yes, that beneath the church's disapproval and the public mockery, a quiet revolution had begun. Others argue it didn't matter until royalty stepped in, but no one can deny the pattern. Noble families start using forks in secret, then cautiously, in small public settings. Then they start commissioning artisans to make personalized ones, some with their crests, others with intricate patterns of birds and vines. And once something becomes personalized, you know it's here to stay. There's a story, uncertain but charming, of a Hungarian count who threw an entire banquet where every guest received their own fork. Not to use, of course, just to admire. He called it a tribute to civility. Most of the guests took theirs home and pretended to forget it under their chairs, but the forks kept appearing, in quiet corners, in ornate boxes, on dessert plates. They had made it past the whispers, past the sermons, past the side-eyes at dinner. Tables, they weren't embraced, not yet, but they were no longer feared, and so Back in your room above a sleepy tavern in Prague, you place your fork on the table beside your candle. It's heavier than you remember, slightly bent, clearly used. Not just a utensil now, but a survivor. You wonder what other ideas, what other revolutions started this small. The road winds west again, and now we are in Renaissance Italy, Florence to be exact, where every cobblestone seems to hum with the energy of genius. Art spills from alleyways, music floats from balconies, and even the pigeons look like they've had opinions on sculpture since birth. You duck into a small villa near the Arno River. It's warm inside, the scent of olives and roasted garlic clinging to the wooden beams. A servant ushers you into a dining room where the host, refined, well-fed, and wearing more rings than fingers, welcomes you with a kind of smile that suggests either wealth or a deeply personal relationship with butter. And there it is. On the table, nestled between the bread and the fig compote, sits a fork, not hidden, not shamed, not whispered about behind lace fans, just there. You don't realize you're staring until the host chuckles and says, "Ah, yes, a small miracle, isn't it? The most civilized invention since wine." You nod slowly, fingers brushing the tablecloth. It's finally happening. The fork has found a friend. In Renaissance Italy, especially in cities like Florence and Venice, the fork isn't just tolerated, it's celebrated among the elite. The Medici family uses them. Venetian merchants who've made fortunes trading with the East show them off like trophies. They are seen not as tools of sin anymore, but of style. But don't get too comfortable. Not everyone's convinced. You attend a banquet where two visiting French noblemen share a look of mild horror as the first course is served with forks. One of them leans over to whisper, "Is it sharp enough to kill a man, or just his pride?" You nearly snort wine. Through your nose, old habits die hard. Even as Italians embrace this elegant eating tool, travelers from more conservative regions still raise their eyebrows, their knives, and occasionally their voices. One cardinal visiting from Spain reportedly refused to eat for 2 days after being offered a fork, claiming that such vanity invites famine of the soul. That feels a bit dramatic, but hey, drama is in the air here. Michelangelo is painting ceilings, Botticelli is imagining goddesses in clamshells, and everyone is debating things like whether laughter offends heaven and the fork. It fits right in, not just as a utensil, but as a symbol of refinement, of Renaissance rebirth. In portraits of noble women, you now see forks appear beside fruits, delicately angled like a subtle flex. "Look at me," they seem to say. "I eat cherries." Without sticky fingers, and I understand Greek philosophy. Here's a strange but delightful fact. Some early Italian forks were designed with only 2 prongs, still clinging to the ancient Persian style. Others began to branch into 3 or even 4, better for spearing pasta or delicate meats. Like the artists of the time, fork makers became innovators, combining form and function in ways that felt almost romantic. You visit a silversmith's workshop tucked behind a church courtyard. Inside, a dozen half-finished forks glitter under lamplight. One has a handle carved with a lion's face, another a spiral of vines. You ask the smith if people actually use these. He laughs. Sometimes, mostly they collect them, talk about them, argue over who has the best one. It's like poetry, only shinier. And you realize for the first time, the fork is no longer just a thing to eat with. It's a conversation piece, a fashion statement, a rebellion that has slowly become couture. Historians still argue over which household first used the fork in public dinner settings in Italy. Some claim it was the Medici court. Others insist it was merchants returning from Constantinople. Some say it doesn't matter, that ideas like this always bloom in several places at once, like dandelions or bad poetry. But one thing is certain, in Renaissance Italy, the fork is thriving. Of course, there's still resistance. In Rome, a few bishops remain wary. In northern villages, Older peasants mutter that eating with iron is like kissing a ghost. You love that one. It makes no sense, but it sounds deeply emotional. Still, the momentum is building. After dinner, as the sun sinks behind Florence's tiled rooftops, you sit alone with your own modest fork. Not gilded, not jeweled, just simple and honest, like the bread you tear apart beside it. You think of Theodora, of Prague, of whispering priests and sneaky nobles, and you wonder, what would they think, seeing this little revolution finally take root? A once banned object, now admired, a symbol of pride, no longer shame. You smile, because for the first time, it's starting to feel inevitable. The wind has changed again, and now you're standing beneath the glittering chandeliers of Versailles. Welcome to France, late 17th century, a place where fashion changes faster than the wine list, and everything must sparkle. The air smells faintly of roses and powdered wigs, and the courtiers glide more than they walk, silks swishing like gossip across marble floors. And sitting at the very center of all this beauty, elegance, and occasionally horrifying body odor is Louis XIV, the Sun King. His shoes are bejeweled, his hair a towering wig, his gaze unblinking, piercing, like he's trying to decide whether to knight you or exile you for crimes against fashion. But what really catches your attention isn't his gold-threaded tunic or the powdered cheeks of the courtiers. It's what's quietly lying on the dining table in front of every guest. A fork, not hidden, not whispered, not shameful. Glorious. This is the moment. This is where the fork, after centuries of side-eye and suspicion, finally earns its royal seal of approval. Because when Louis XIV does something, even something as small as picking up a piece of pear with a fork, the rest of Europe takes notice. He isn't the first French royal to use one, but he's the one who makes it fashion. And in Versailles, fashion is sacred. If the Sun King drinks his broth from porcelain and lifts his meat with 3 silver tines, then by heaven, so will you, even if it kills your budget and your peasant pride. You watch a nobleman across the table attempt to balance a pickled quail, egg on the end of his fork. It slips, rolls down his plate, and lands, plop, into a neighboring duchess's wine. She doesn't flinch. She just smiles and plucks it out with her own fork, like it's all part of some elegant edible dance. Forks are now not only accepted in France, they're required. Versailles enforces dining etiquette with the same rigor armies enforce borders. You use the right fork for the right dish, or risk being talked about in powder rooms for months. Some forks now have 4 tines. Some are curved slightly to help with twirling. Dessert forks are smaller, daintier, with handles so thin you're afraid to breathe near them. There's even a rumor that a noblewoman commissioned a fork specifically for raspberries, 1 raspberry at a time. You can't tell if that's extreme or genius, but not everyone's impressed. While French nobles are forking everything from snails to strawberries, other European courts roll their eyes. In England, for example, King James I reportedly called forks effeminate and insisted on using his fingers until his death. Across the Holy Roman Empire, some nobles see forks as French affectation, fine for desserts maybe, but not for a real meal. Still, the tide is turning. The fork that once banned Byzantine curiosity is now a glittering accessory at Europe's most powerful table. And what happens in Versailles doesn't stay in Versailles. It ripples outward, like perfume through a crowded ballroom. One evening, while sipping sweet wine beside a velvet-draped window, you overhear 2 courtiers discussing a scandal. A visiting duke arrived late to dinner, dropped his fork, and picked it up himself by hand gasp. He didn't wait for a footman. He didn't request a replacement. He touched it with his fingers. Like a merchant, I thought I would faint, says the first courtier. He probably trims his own mustache, replies the second, shuddering. You laugh quietly into your glass, because the fork is now more than a tool. It's a signal, a password, a golden ticket to elite society. And if you don't use it right, or if you use it too boldly, it can betray you faster than a dropped letter in a love affair. Historians still debate how much Louis XIV's personal habits influenced wider adoption across Europe. Some argue it was inevitable, part of a broader cultural shift. Others insist that if the Sun King had picked up his meat with tongs instead, we'd all be tonging our sausages to this day. But you? You saw it. You saw the moment a taboo became a tradition, and later that night, alone in your guest chamber, you sit at a small table with a plate of fruit and a fork, polished, elegant, made by artisans who now make their living designing them. Like jewelry, you stab a grape, just one. It squishes a little, but you feel like royalty anyway. Your boots scuff across the cobbles of a new century now, one powdered with reason, riddled with revolutions, and bathed in the flickering light of Enlightenment thought. You're in London, where the coffee houses are buzzing, the air smells faintly of ink and damp wool, and arguments are the city's favorite sport. This is the 18th century. Here people don't just eat, they write essays about how they eat. And somewhere between the pamphlets on the rights of man and treatises on gravity, the fork has slipped into polite society with a raised eyebrow and a very smug grin. You take a seat in a small candle-lit tavern where philosophers rub elbows with pickpockets, and someone has placed a fork on the table as casually as a salt shaker. It's got 4 tines, smooth handle, iron, not silver, practical, not pretentious, progress, and across from you sits a gentleman with an untamed wig and a powdered nose. He twirls his fork in his fingers as if it's a pen. Remarkable little thing, isn't it, he says. Clean fingers, neat plate, civilized digestion, almost makes you believe in the perfectibility of man. You smile, but before you can reply, he continues, "Of course, some of the old guard still think it's French nonsense, the sort of frippery that leads to powdered knees and revolutions, but those are usually the same men who butter their bread with a hunting knife." He's not wrong. The Enlightenment has lit fires in the minds of men, but many still resist change at the table. In English country homes, fingers still reign supreme. In certain Scottish inns, you're more likely to be offered a dagger than a fork. But in the cities, London, Edinburgh, Paris, the fork has become a badge of sophistication, of education. It's also become a source of comedy. You find yourself at a satirical play one evening, tucked into a smoky little theater near the Strand. On stage, a pompous character fumbles through dinner with a ridiculous array of forks: fish fork, meat fork, dessert fork, soup fork, which everyone knows shouldn't exist, until he finally gives up and eats with his hands to wild applause. It's hilarious and weirdly accurate, because even as the fork gains status, it's also caught in the crosshairs of satire. The Enlightenment loves logic, but it also loves to laugh at itself. You hear philosophers joke that the fork is a metaphor, the tines are reason, the handle is civilization, and the meat? Well, that's you, being impaled by progress. Still, progress wins. You visit a gentleman's club where the servers wear tails and the menus are in 3 languages. Every place setting has at least 3 forks, one of which, you're told, is only for asparagus. You're not even sure you like asparagus, but now you want to try it just to see what all the fuss is about. Meanwhile, over in France, something slightly more dramatic is happening. Revolution. Heads are rolling, palaces are being emptied, and silver forks, once signs of wealth and status, are quietly disappearing from public view. Owning fine utensils in revolutionary Paris can be dangerous. A little too ancien regime for comfort. You hear stories of families burying their silverware in the garden, hiding it behind bricks in the hearth, swapping forks for wood, for tin, for safety. But even in revolution, the fork doesn't vanish, it adapts. And as new republics are born, so too are new ideas about equality at the table. The fork becomes less about class, more about cleanliness, utility, hygiene. In fact, around this time, doctors and scientists begin promoting the fork for health reasons. Reduces direct hand contact, one physician writes, lessens the spread of infection. A man in Vienna tries to convince his colleagues that forks are an early form of medical utensil. You chuckle, imagining a fork in a white coat holding a clipboard. Historians still debate which Enlightenment thinkers truly embraced the fork. Voltaire probably used one. Rousseau might have refused out of some philosophical point about the natural state of man. Immanuel Kant, it said, had a fork schedule. Same time, same hand, every day without fail. That one feels right. What's clear is that the fork has passed the test of satire, superstition, and snobbery. It's no longer just a fashion. It's becoming a fixture. Later, in a small boarding house near Covent Garden, you sit alone with your dinner. There's a book beside your plate, and a modest fork resting across the edge. Outside, a chimney sweep whistles a familiar tune. Inside, you take a bite, tidy, efficient, unsmeared. You pause. You can't help but feel it. For the first time, the fork isn't just accepted, it's expected. Your boots scuff across the cobbles of a new century now, one powdered with reason, riddled with revolutions, and bathed in the flickering light of Enlightenment thought. You're in London, where the coffee houses are buzzing, the air smells faintly of ink and damp wool, and arguments are the city's favorite sport. This is the 18th century. Here people don't just eat, they write essays about how they eat. And somewhere between the pamphlets on the rights of man and treatises on gravity, the fork has slipped into polite society with a raised eyebrow and a very smug grin. You take a seat in a small candle-lit tavern where philosophers rub elbows with pickpockets, and someone has placed a fork on the table as casually as a salt shaker. It's got 4 tines, smooth handle, iron, not silver, practical, not pretentious, progress, and across from you sits a gentleman with an untamed wig and a powdered nose. He twirls his fork in his fingers as if it's a pen. Remarkable little thing, isn't it, he says. Clean fingers, neat plate, civilized digestion, almost makes you believe in the perfectibility of man. You smile, but before you can reply, he continues, of course, some of the old guard still think it's French nonsense, the sort of frippery that leads to powdered knees and revolutions, but those are usually the same men who butter their bread with a hunting knife. He's not wrong. The Enlightenment has lit fires in the minds of men, but many still resist change at the table. In English country homes, fingers still reign supreme. In certain Scottish inns, you're more likely to be offered a dagger than a fork. But in the cities, London, Edinburgh, Paris, the fork has become a badge of sophistication, of education. It's also become a source of comedy. You find yourself at a satirical play one evening, tucked into a smoky little theater near the Strand. On stage, a pompous character fumbles through dinner with a ridiculous array of forks: fish fork, meat fork, dessert fork, soup fork, which everyone knows shouldn't exist, until he finally gives up and eats with his hands to wild applause. It's hilarious and weirdly accurate, because even as the fork gains status, it's also caught in the crosshairs of satire. The Enlightenment loves logic, but it also loves to laugh at itself. You hear philosophers joke that the fork is a metaphor, the tines are reason, the handle is civilization, and the meat? Well, that's you, being impaled by progress. Still, progress wins. You visit a gentleman's club where the servers wear tails and the menus are in 3 languages. Every place setting has at least 3 forks, one of which, you're told, is only for asparagus. You're not even sure you like asparagus, but now you want to try it just to see what all the fuss is about. Meanwhile, over in France, something slightly more dramatic is happening. Revolution. Heads are rolling, palaces are being emptied, and silver forks, once signs of wealth and status, are quietly disappearing from public view. Owning fine utensils in revolutionary Paris can be dangerous, a little too ancien regime for comfort. You hear stories of families burying their silverware in the garden, hiding it behind bricks in the hearth, swapping forks for wood, for tin, for safety. But even in revolution, the fork doesn't vanish, it adapts. And as new republics are born, so too are new ideas about equality at the table. The fork becomes less about class, more about cleanliness, utility, hygiene. In fact, around this time, doctors and scientists begin promoting the fork for health reasons. Reduces direct hand contact, one physician writes, lessens the spread of infection. A man in Vienna tries to convince his colleagues that forks are an early form of medical utensil. You chuckle, imagining a fork in a white coat, holding a clipboard. Historians still debate which Enlightenment thinkers truly embraced the fork. Voltaire probably used one. Rousseau might have refused out of some philosophical point about the natural state of man. Immanuel Kant, it said, had a fork schedule. Same time, same hand, every day without fail. That one feels right. What's clear is that the fork has passed the test of satire, superstition, and snobbery. It's no longer just a fashion. It's becoming a fixture. Later, in a small boarding house near Covent Garden, you sit alone with your dinner. There's a book beside your plate, and a modest fork resting across the edge. Outside, a chimney sweep whistles a familiar tune. Inside, you take a bite, tidy, efficient, unsmeared. You pause. You can't help but feel it. For the first time, the fork isn't just accepted, it's expected. You hear it before you see it. The hiss of steam, the clang of metal, the deep rhythmic heartbeat of a world spinning faster than it ever has before. Welcome to the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution has cracked the sky open, and out pours iron, smoke, and ambition. You step off a soot-dusted train into a city that's more machine than town. Everywhere you turn, there's something churning, hammering, or ticking. It smells like coal and progress, and through the fog of invention, guess who's right there? On the assembly line, the fork. You walk into a cutlery factory in Sheffield, England, metal capital of the world. Inside, sparks fly as molten steel is poured into molds, hammered into shape, polished to a shine. It's loud, it's hot, it's glorious. A man in a stained apron leans over and hands you a newly made fork. It's warm, slightly imperfect, but beautiful. 4 tines, gleaming handle, stamped with the factory's initials. It's one of hundreds made that day, and by the end of the week, it'll be packed into a crate and sent to a hotel in Cairo, a boarding school in Boston, or a dining hall in Berlin. This is the first time in history the fork is available to the middle class in mass quantities. No longer a handmade luxury. No longer a status symbol for aristocrats. This is the democratization of dining. You walk through a London department store and see boxed sets of matching silverware, knives, spoons, and yes, forks. 3-pronged, 4-pronged, serving forks, pastry forks, oyster forks. There are advertisements boasting modern hygienic dining and refined habits for respectable homes. You pick one up and laugh. It promises to rescue your roast from the mess of medieval fingers. You don't tell them you've been to the medieval mess. You just nod and keep walking. In Victorian England, dining becomes almost absurdly complicated. There are forks for salad, fish, fruit, cake, sardines, even ice cream, though no one seems to know how that's supposed to work. If you use the wrong fork, you're committing a faux pas on the level of burping during the national anthem. You attend a dinner party where the table is set with enough utensils to outfit a small militia. 10 guests, 127 pieces of cutlery, a fork for every mood apparently. Halfway through the soup, you lean toward the man beside you, starched collar, glass monocle, very serious sideburns, and ask which fork is next. He panics. You both guess. You both get it wrong. You both laugh into your napkins. But that's the thing. The fork has become so common, it's now a source of anxiety for the upwardly mobile. Etiquette books are published faster than tabloids. Some even include diagrams. When in doubt, move from the outside in. You imagine a young couple memorizing fork positions by candlelight, like they're cramming for a final exam. And over in America, something else is happening. Factories in New England and Pennsylvania churn out cutlery. For the growing middle class, forks become part of the wedding trousseau, the graduation gift, the proof that your family has arrived. You walk into a catalog office in 1880 and flip through pages of Sears and Roebuck. 1 dozen dining forks, steel tines, bone handle, $1.75. You could furnish your whole table for less than a round of ale at a city bar. Of course, the rich still flaunt their golden forks and pearl-handled salad spears, but now everyone has a fork. Even workers in tenement kitchens, even ranchers out west, even students in dusty schoolhouses. Forks have gone viral. Some designs are practical, others less so. You see a fork with a foldable hinge for gentlemen dining on the go. You find one with an ivory handle shaped like a lion's paw. You hold a 6-tined monstrosity labeled turkey fork, though it looks better suited for medieval jousting. And then there is the mustache fork. Yes, that's real. Invented in the 1860s, it has a little guard like a tiny fence across the tines to protect a gentleman's mustache from soup or gravy. You try one. It works. You feel both ridiculous and extremely dapper. Historians still argue whether this explosion of fork types helped or hindered proper dining. Some say it taught people refinement. Others say it created an anxiety industry. One Victorian critic grumbles that a man now needs a blueprint to eat asparagus. But you see something else? You see how the fork, once a banned symbol of decadence, has become customizable, personal, playful, the tool that adapts to your class, your culture, your course. Later that night, you sit by the window of a guest house overlooking smokestacks and cobbled streets. On your tray is a wedge of pie and a humble iron fork. You take a bite. Somewhere in the distance, a factory bell rings. A cat meows. The future is humming, and your fork is ready for it. You wake to a quiet that feels temporary, like the moment before a thunderstorm or the hush between wars. It's the 20th century now. The sky is split by airships. Radios crackle with jazz and propaganda. Fashion has lost its corsets. And the world is about to eat faster, louder, and more globally than ever before. You're sitting in a 1920s diner, chrome gleaming under fluorescent lights, and a waitress, chewing gum with incredible commitment, slides a plate in front of you. Fried eggs, toast, and bacon, a knife, a spoon, and, of course, a fork, 3 tines, steel, sturdy, functional, nothing fancy. You use it without thinking, because that's the point. The fork is now so common, it's background noise. No longer a curiosity, no longer a statement, just a tool, but that doesn't mean it stops evolving. You walk past a row of department store shelves, each one stacked with utensils designed for the modern lifestyle. That means lighter materials, shinier finishes, a growing obsession with convenience. By the 1930s, stainless steel becomes the new standard. Easy to clean. Doesn't rust, doesn't tarnish. You buy a whole set for under $1 and never polish anything again. It's a small domestic revolution, tucked neatly beside the toaster. Then, war. The 1940s shake everything. You're suddenly in a military mess hall, sitting shoulder to shoulder with soldiers. Forks are fewer, sometimes replaced with hybrid tools. You're handed something strange, a spork. Half spoon, half fork, all compromise. You tilt your head at it. It tilts back. You eat anyway. The spork is efficient. Soldiers carry fewer utensils. Metal is rationed. It fits in your pocket. It makes sense. And like most wartime solutions, it lingers. Post-war, America roars back to life with suburban sprawl and frozen dinners. You walk through a 1950s kitchen, pastel everything, blenders humming, casseroles baking, Tupperware stacked like Lego blocks. On the Formica table, a tray of food sealed in tin, Salisbury steak, peas, mashed potatoes. You peel back the foil. A plastic fork awaits. Yes, plastic. It's flimsy, disposable, light as air. But it's the future, baby. Made from polystyrene, the plastic fork becomes a staple of convenience culture. You see it everywhere: picnics, school lunches, airplane meals. It doesn't conduct heat, it doesn't clang in your teeth, it breaks if you so much as look at it wrong. But who cares? You just throw it away. The 1960s go full modern. Advertising gets aggressive. There are ads for forks now. One shows a woman picking out silverware like she's choosing a husband. Strong, dependable, elegant. Another: why trust your appetite to a fork with a past? You chuckle. You see hippies eating tofu with bamboo forks, CEOs dining with monogrammed silver, teenagers poking Jell-O in cafeterias with plastic sporks, humming Beatles songs under their breath. The fork has become an accessory. Even the fast food boom plays into it. McDonald's avoids forks entirely, unless it's for a sundae. But other chains, they hand out plastic cutlery by the bucket. You get a fork in a sealed plastic bag with every drive-through meal, whether you asked for one or not. And here's something weird. The 1970s see a brief rise in eco-cutlery, wooden forks, compostable designs, the green movement's early whispers. You sit at a park protest. Someone hands you tofu stir-fry in a recycled bowl with a biodegradable fork that tastes slightly like mulch. It's not great, but it's earnest, a cross. The globe of forks now reflect local culture in hybrid forms. In Japan, they coexist with chopsticks. Kids use forks. Grandparents stick with tradition. In India, the fork is sometimes passed over entirely for hands, rich with ceremony and meaning. And in outer space, yes, you heard that right, astronauts on the Apollo missions use custom-designed utensil sets with magnetic grips to keep forks from floating away mid-meal. You float beside them for a moment. A fork hovers in zero gravity, twinkling in the cabin light. Historians argue about this age of the fork. Some say we lost elegance in our race toward convenience. Others say we finally made the fork democratic, cheap, available, useful for everyone, everywhere. A single mom in 1980s Chicago stabs a fish stick with a plastic fork while helping her kid with math homework. A royal wedding in London features golden forks embroidered with family crests. A punk rocker eats ramen with a bent cafeteria fork, tattoos peeking past the sleeves. The fork is no longer just about function. It's cultural, emotional, political, and still quiet. It sits there on the edge of your plate like a patient witness, watching the world evolve. It doesn't make noise, it doesn't flash, but without it, half your meals wouldn't make it past your mouth. Late at night, you find yourself in a 24-hour diner. A waitress refills your coffee without asking. Your fries are getting cold. You pick up your fork, plastic, slightly bent, but still doing its job. You take a bite, and as neon light pools on the formica, you realize the fork has become invisible. And that's its final triumph. It no longer shocks. It no longer inspires panic. It simply is. You're standing in an airport terminal somewhere in the early 2000s. Bright screens flash boarding gates in 8 languages. A child drags a Hello Kitty suitcase. A businessman eats pad thai out of a compostable container with a fork. That's the thing. You're not in Thailand. You're in Frankfurt. But globalization has done what centuries of banquets, popes, and plagues could not. It made the fork everywhere. Not just available, but expected. A universal passport for food. You walk through the international food court. There's sushi with forks, crepes with forks, tacos with forks. A crime, but one you've seen too many times to be shocked. Someone's eating dim sum with a fork and a spoon, like a cultural blender set on puree. Somewhere a culinary traditionalist dies a little, but it's not all bad. You visit a Michelin-starred restaurant in Tokyo. The chef bows gently and places before you a plate of perfect uni, served with a fork. A sleek, 3-pronged titanium fork, custom-made. Minimalist, a design marvel. You lift it. It's balanced like a surgeon's scalpel. The chef nods approvingly. You're not using this fork out of ignorance. You're using it out of precision. The modern fork has entered its luxury phase. You stroll through a Parisian boutique where forks are displayed like jewelry. Hand-forged steel, matte black finish. One is sold with the tagline, redefining the art of piercing vegetables. Another promises to be gender neutral. You don't know what that means, but it's €60, so you nod slowly and move on. Meanwhile, in Brooklyn, a small batch cutlery startup has rebranded forks as slowware. Their whole pitch, eat like your ancestors, but ethically. Reclaimed metal, locally sourced packaging. Every fork has a name. You eat a quinoa bowl with clementine, and just when you think the fork can't get any more self-aware, it does, because this is the age of fork shaming. Oh yes, you're scrolling social media. A video flashes across your feed, someone eating sushi with a fork. The comment section is brutal. Criminal behavior. Go to jail. My ancestors are crying. A trend emerges. People posting their most awkward fork moments. Using a salad fork for steak, poking spaghetti instead of twirling, eating pizza with a fork. Okay, maybe that deserves gentle side-eye. The internet has turned into a digital etiquette salon where forks are a litmus test for cultural fluency. But here's the thing, all these rules, they're made up, invented, reinvented, shaped by time, place, and who's holding the fork. You walk into a Nigerian wedding. The elders eat with their hands, gracefully, purposefully. The young adults, forks, sparkling, straight-backed forks. Some even switch mid-meal. No one minds. You visit a street food stall in Hanoi. A traveler next to you fumbles with chopsticks. You offer him your backup fork. He smiles grateful. No one cries. In Copenhagen, you eat a 12-course tasting menu with a parade of forks so elegant they come with their own tiny pillows. The server explains each one like it's a character in a novel. This fork is for fermented radish foam. You try not to laugh. Later, you do anyway, because underneath all the sophistication, the fork is still just a fork. Still the humble tool that lifts food to your mouth. Still the object that once caused theological panic, then royal obsession, then diner indifference. You remember Section 2, when people thought it was Satan's pitchfork, and now it's on TikTok. That's evolution. And still, historians can't agree on whether this modern fork mania is a symbol of progress or just performance. Some say we finally made peace with the fork, learning to use it with confidence, but not fear. Others argue we're now using it to judge others more harshly than ever. A fork isn't just a utensil anymore. It's a social signal, an aesthetic choice, a meme template. You sip an espresso at a sidewalk cafe and watch a couple split a pastry. One uses a fork, the other breaks it with their hands. They laugh. No one gets canceled. You think of the Pope who banned forks, the monks who thought they were sinful, the Victorian hosts who feared using the wrong tine, the astronauts in zero gravity. And now, here you are, on a Tuesday, in 2006, sharing a slice of cake with a biodegradable fork. Half your attention is on the sunset. The other half is on whether this fork can survive the frosting. It barely does. You lick the edge, careful not to snap it. Not very dignified, but honest. And somewhere across the centuries, the fork winks in quiet approval. You find yourself in a quiet, humming workspace. The lighting is low, warm, the air filled with the gentle tapping of metal tools. You've stepped behind the curtain, into the design labs, the think tanks, the idea factories of the modern fork. Yes, people are still designing forks. You pick one up off a brushed steel counter. It's different, slightly curved, weighted oddly toward the handle. The prongs are forked in such a way that they spiral, almost like a corkscrew. You glance at the engineer beside you. She grins. It's a spaghetti-optimized fork. Requires 1.5 fewer wrist rotations per bite. You nod like you understand. You do not, but that's the point. We've reached an age where forks are not merely made, they're engineered. Ergonomics, material science, even aerodynamics are considered. You see forks with asymmetrical tines to better stab, twist, or scoop. Some have a slightly sharpened inner edge. One model even warms to match your hand's temperature. Because why not? Then there's the tactical fork, developed for outdoor survivalists, made of carbon fiber. Has a built-in compass and a can opener on the end. Feels like something Batman would pack for lunch. You sit in on a design meeting. A PowerPoint plays in the background with slides labeled Tine Alignment versus User Confidence. One researcher is holding a prototype fork with a thumb rest and laser pointer. He's dead serious. You want to laugh, but you don't, because you remember something. The fork has always been a little extra. Back in the 17th century, nobles commissioned forks carved from ivory, set with jewels, or forged from gold. In a way, today's over-designed forks are just echoing that same hunger for control, for elegance, for identity. Then you flip open an etiquette book. This one is heavy, bound in navy blue leather. 1963 edition. Chapter 7. The Language of Forks? Yes, apparently they speak. You learn that the fork you leave on your plate at a 4 o'clock angle says, "I'm finished," while the fork crossed with a knife signals, "I'm just resting." You discover the existence of the fish fork, shorter and broader, sometimes with a notch for bones. There's the dessert fork, with one wider tine for pushing cake, and the salad fork, which, honestly, no one agrees what it's for anymore. You laugh quietly to yourself. And then you stumble upon the weirdest part yet. The patents. You flip through a virtual archive. Some inventions are brilliant, others are questionable. There's a motorized spaghetti fork that twirls noodles. For you, great in theory. In practice, you once saw a video of someone flinging marinara sauce across a date's white shirt because the battery surged. Then there's the fork with built-in thermometer, so you can check the temperature of your meat before committing to a bite. Useful, but slightly intimidating. Like your fork is judging your cooking skills in real time. And of course, the singing fork, designed to play music through vibrations in your teeth. That's right. You eat a bite of salad, and suddenly your molars hum the chorus of Bohemian Rhapsody. It's a lot. You wonder who dreams these things up. Then you meet one, a retired industrial designer named Wallace. He's 72. Lives in Vermont, spends his weekends building forks out of scrap metal and driftwood. Every fork has a story, he says, handing you one made from an old bicycle spoke. This one was for my dog's birthday. You nod, unsure. If he means the fork or the bicycle, but you love it anyway, because somehow, despite centuries of use, we haven't run out of ways to reinvent the fork, to make it better, or weirder, or more ours. And historians? Well, they have opinions. Some argue the over-design of forks today reflects a kind of cultural anxiety. We've lost connection with our food, so we dress up the tools. Others think it's just creativity for its own sake, a way to remind ourselves that even small things, mundane things, can be delightful. You pick up a plastic fork from a takeout bag and compare it to the hand-forged titanium one from earlier. Different ends of the spectrum, both forks, both doing their job, and both somehow expressions of the human spirit. You leave the lab, passing a small display case on your way out. Inside, a medieval fork, 2 tines, rusted, bent, probably used for olives or revenge. You smile, everything changes, but the fork remains. You're at a dinner party, but not just any dinner party. This one's in the future. Not flying cars and Mars colonies, no. Think 15, maybe 20 years ahead. The vibe is sleek, sustainable, and just a little smug. There's ambient lighting. Everything is compostable. The appetizers are 3D printed. The wine is non-alcoholic, but molecularly expressive. And in your hand, a fork that talks to your phone. Yes, this is smart cutlery. You look down at your fork. It vibrates once, politely. A notification pops up on your smartwatch. You're eating too fast. You roll your eyes. But slow down anyway. The fork continues monitoring your bites, pressure, and duration of chewing. It's logging everything into an app that promises to improve your digestion, sleep quality, and mindful eating habits. Somewhere, your ancestors are shouting into the void. You glance at the guy across the table. His fork glows green every time he takes a balanced bite. Protein, vegetable, grain, like a little LED therapist for your plate. At first, you're skeptical, then mildly amused, then a little into it. But here's the twist. This isn't science fiction. Prototypes of smart forks already exist. They count bites, detect salt levels, even pair with smart fridges. Because clearly, what you need is a utensil that can judge your sodium intake and tweet about it. You take another bite. The fork buzzes again. Passive-aggressive cutlery is real, but not everyone's on board with this techno-utensil revolution. At a food conference in Berlin, chefs are rebelling. Eating should be sensual, one says, holding up a wooden fork like a protest sign. Not surveilled. Others worry about data. Who owns your chewing stats? Can they be hacked? Will insurance companies deny you coverage because your fork knows you eat 9 cookies after midnight? A dystopian dinner indeed. Still, the future marches on. You walk through a sustainable design expo. Edible forks are everywhere, made of wheat, corn husks, seaweed. One booth hands out forks made of compressed coffee grounds. Another sells chocolate forks. For desserts, you eat with the fork, then the fork itself. Genius, sticky, but genius. You're offered a biodegradable fork that smells faintly of rosemary. It breaks if you try to stab anything firmer than a steamed carrot, but it makes you feel like a responsible citizen of Earth. Some companies even offer subscription services. New forks every month, themed for seasons or cuisine types. October brings pumpkin spice forks. July comes with grilling forks that double as thermometers. You begin to suspect the world may be running out of problems, but not everyone is laughing. You hear whispers, rumors of a final Vatican scandal. You perk up. Apparently, deep within the walls of a certain Vatican kitchen, one used only for private dinners of very important people, there was a recent incident involving a fork made entirely of gold. It was accidentally served to a visiting dignitary who, unaware, took it home in their napkin. It caused a minor diplomatic meltdown. The fork, traced through security cameras and confessionals, was eventually returned. Quietly. No one was punished. But the Pope, this Pope, allegedly shook his head and said, "Maybe we should have stuck with spoons." There it is again, that tension, that long-standing spiritual skepticism about the fork. Even now, after all this time, in the age of apps and edible plastic, the fork still carries a tiny ghost of controversy. Maybe it always will. Historians argue about this too. Some think the fork's journey reflects the evolution of Western attitudes toward control and propriety, from sinful to sacred, from crude to elegant. Others see it as proof that humanity just loves to overthink the tools we use, and they might be right. You lean back in your chair, the smart fork resting beside you, glowing gently like it's preparing to judge your dessert. You remember the scandal in Section 1, the Pope who banned the fork. You remember the Byzantine bride in Section 3 who dared to lift one at her wedding. The Victorian hosts in Section 8, the astronauts in Section 11. Each generation tried to make the fork into something more, a tool, a symbol, a weapon, a statement, and now it buzzes in your hand when you forget to chew thoroughly. Progress, you. Smile, because despite all the drama, the fork is still here. Still poking, still twirling, still quietly waiting beside the plate. Not perfect, not neutral, but faithful. As you leave the dinner party of the future, you pass a wall-mounted display of forks from around the world, a tiny brass one from India, a twisted wooden fork from Ethiopia, a plastic cocktail fork from a Las Vegas buffet. Everyone tells a story, and you're almost at the end of yours. The night is still. Your room hums softly. just the low murmur of a fan and the occasional creak of furniture settling into silence. The journey is nearly done. You sit with your memories now, not of your life, but of the forks. A story older than it looks, stranger than it should be. You never thought a piece of cutlery could carry so much drama. And yet, you close your eyes, and you can still feel the heat of a Byzantine feast where a bride lifted 2 prongs of gold and scandalized a continent. You hear the mutterings of monks who called it prideful, sinful. You picture a pope shaking his head with divine disappointment over a dinner table. You can smell the roasted goose of a Renaissance banquet, the trembling hands of a 17th century diner trying to choose the correct fork for oysters. You see the Industrial Revolution's conveyor belts of nickel-plated forks, mass-produced for the hungry middle class. You remember the astronauts floating above Earth stabbing meatballs with a fork that would never fall. You feel it all, and now you breathe. In the present. The modern fork lies beside your bed. Well, metaphorically, or maybe literally. Perhaps there's one on a plate from a late-night snack. It doesn't matter. The point is, it's here. And so are you. And somewhere along the way, this simple tool, a bent piece of metal, became a mirror. It showed us our vanity, our fears, our attempts to impress, to control, to eat neatly. It revealed our obsessions with rules, our creativity in bending them, and our absolute refusal to eat salad with our fingers when we're trying to be polite. It was never just about food. You think about the details, the ones that slipped in quietly. Remember the fish fork with the notch? The carbon fiber survival fork with a compass? The edible rosemary fork that barely survived a single baby carrot? You chuckle softly at the memory of the fork that vibrated at your chewing pace, the one that called you out for midnight cookies, the one that, if we're honest, wasn't wrong, and through it all, there's a quiet truth. The fork adapted. It outlived scandal, suspicion, and centuries of culinary evolution. It outlasted the fear of change and the thrill of novelty. It managed to become ordinary, comfortably ordinary, like a lullaby hummed for 1,000 years. Historians, of course, are still debating. Some say the fork's journey proves humanity's brilliance, our capacity to refine, reinvent, and ritualize the simplest things. Others argue it reflects our deepest neuroses, how we overthink even how we eat. Both are probably right. But tonight there are no arguments, no etiquette to memorize, no need to impress the Pope, just you. And the sound of the world slowly quieting down. You shift gently under the blanket, the weight of history fading like fog at dawn. And, as your breath slows, you think, softly, distantly, about the humble fork, how it stabbed its way through time, whispering stories from candlelit halls to TikTok screens, how it reminded you that even the most mundane things, the most boring history, can be oddly comforting in the right light. And now it rests. So do you. Drift away, traveler. You've learned enough for one night.